We are live.
We are live. Good evening. This is a meeting of the Council Rock School District Board of School Directors Policy Committee. I'm the chair, Ed Tate, and we have with us two board members.
Marianne McKay, School Board.
And Kristen Marcel.
Kristen Marcel.
Very good. Thank you. And we have staffing the policy committee so ably is Matt Frederickson on a continual basis. Terrifically helpful, keeps us organized, manages the relationship with the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, which is doing the review. And since we're doing personnel policies tonight, we have with us Christine Taylor, who is the district's Director of Human Resources. Good. All right. We'll start with 301. Oh, well, we've called to order. Public comment doesn't come to the end. Good. That's what I was checking. 301, creating a position. Mrs. Taylor, please.
Okay. So routinely when I look at policies, I look at our neighboring districts to see what they've included, what they've excluded. So a lot of my comments tonight will refer to that. So on 301, creating a position, I did delete under delegation of responsibility number 4, the number of employees required within each job category. And the reason why I deleted that is because that could be variable depending on many factors, enrollment, financial outlook. I just think it's something that we don't need to have there, and other districts in our area agree, and that is not included in their policy as well.
That makes sense. Operating needs, financial resources, job description. So this is virtually unchanged except for that one bullet point.
Yes.
Kristen, Marianne?
I have just kind of a housekeeping issue. When I looked at the board policy posted online, the 300s, I think said administrative, and these are professional employees, or actually just employees. So has that changed?
Yes, we consolidated the 3s, 4s, and 5s in one set of policies. So now 301 covers both administrative, professional, and support, whereas before it only referred to
Administrative. Okay, thanks.
Good question, good answer. Next on the list is 312, performance assessment, superintendent, assistant superintendent.
Okay, so on this policy, I made one recommended change. So if you look under a little bit further down, oops, performance, I'm sorry, I'm on 302, which is not the one we're looking at the moment. So under 312, I have a deletion. The deletion that I'm recommending is where the language calls for a written self-assessment of the superintendent and assistant superintendent and the assessment of the board of performance on all of the objectives. The reason why I put a strike through there is that I thought it would give more flexibility to both the board and the superintendent and the assistant superintendent, because my idea is that the policy should set forth the parameters for evaluation, but it should also allow the board and those two individuals to determine the format for the assessment and what's needed. I did take a look to see if that language was included in our neighboring districts, and it is not. So the intent there is to just not make it too restrictive for all parties.
Right. Well, we have in fact had an evolving procedure for the assessment, and we haven't nailed it down yet, so.
Yeah, I think it should include what the board sees fit, and I think this policy without that allows you to do it. When you have that there, it's that you have to have that piece, whether or not you find it useful or not.
And Go ahead.
No, I agree, that just gives more flexibility, and it doesn't prohibit us from asking for that.
Right.
And am I correct in thinking that any professional contract or collective bargaining agreement supersedes policy?
It does. So if your bargaining agreement says something, you're going to follow that. The goal is to make them in tandem with one another, or at least keep policy broad enough to where the bargaining agreement can function without interfering. When we get to some later policies, there's some cleanup we have to do in that regard. But we're not there today, thank goodness.
Yeah, and to your point, Mary, and I was going to raise the same point, which is that the superintendent has a contract that speaks to the assessment and annual review and bonus. And the assistant superintendent has a contract as well, correct?
She does, yes.
Yeah, so irrelevant. Kristen, do you have any objection to striking that?
No, I don't. I actually was going to ask that question, and it turned out that you guys already talked about it. So I'm on the same page.
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot. We're constantly trying to improve that process with the input of the superintendent, because he's interested in improving it too. Next is 313, evaluation of employees. It looked like there was a lot of markup here. A lot added.
On 313?
Yes.
There's a lot of new language on this one. I do.
Right, from
question.
CSBA, but I actually did not alter it at all. I thought that it was very good the way it is, in tandem with our supervision and evaluation plan. So I did not make any changes.
What do you think of PSBA's suggestions?
I think they're right on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing that I noticed about this was that the third and last, or the fourth and last paragraph under delegation of responsibility, the superintendent or assistant administrator, supervisor, the actual people who will be providing the supervision of employees, it's not stated here, but it is contractual that those people be licensed by PDE to perform those evaluations.
I think it's also maybe in school code too.
Okay, so then we're covered.
Kristen?
I don't have any questions about this one.
All right. Neither do I.
I'm good.
So you're okay with the, Ms. Taylor, you're okay with the ratings of distinguished proficient, needs improvement, and failing?
So those are determined at the state level. So, and that it's also codified in school code too.
Okay.
So that's why I think the policy, the way it is fine.
All right, makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Next is 317, conduct disciplinary procedures.
So I added on 317, you'll see in red, I added some language that I thought would be helpful to us, and this is included in other districts as well, requiring that staff sign off that they've read and reviewed and understand policies and procedures. We do that as we hire new people. We give them copies of certain policies, how to get to the rest, and they do sign off. So I included that there. And then a little further down, I added some additional language that just references that in the event that we have to demote or dismiss someone, there would be a hearing as required by statute. So it's very spelled out how much notice you give, the right to a hearing. So that inclusion would be present even without the language being there, but I think it's good to have.
Yeah. I don't object to adding language when it clarifies. again, PSBA recommended adding a good amount of language as well.
Mhm.
And all this is required by state statute.
Very much so.
And as always, these changes get run past our solicitor
When necessary.
when necessary. So in one like this where it's very much specified by state law, but it's also a pretty important policy, how would you decide when to run it by the solicitor?
So PSBA has already run it by their solicitor with the changes that they've made. So if Christine came back and said, we've got to make a lot of changes to this, and I feel more comfortable with ran it by Rob Cox, that's when we go.
Okay.
Yeah, for this one, and if you look at, say, you go to Central Bucks, Centennial, Nishem, it appears just like it is. District after district have not altered this, have left it in its entirety. And it's sound.
Okay. I accept your recommendation. Marianne?
Agree.
Kristen?
I agree too.
Great.
With 317.1 educator misconduct, it's a new policy. I did not alter this in any way. I feel that it's important to leave it as it is, as a new policy. It is reiterating in many ways the code of conduct for professional employees, for certificated employees, and the Educator Discipline Act. I think that it stands on its own without any need for change by us.
This was proposed by PSBA.
Yeah. It also has, as you take a look through, language regarding when the PA Department of Education has to investigate, what the district's responsibility is, timelines. So definitely not something I think that we want to greatly alter or change.
I didn't see, when I looked at this today earlier, I didn't see anything that spoke to public notice. There is confidentiality. Shall remain confidential until public discipline is imposed.
And if you look under confidentiality,
Yes.
next paragraph down, it says in the last sentence, any proceeding related to discipline shall remain confidential unless or until public discipline is imposed.
I knew we have obligation to report to the police if we needed to. We have obligation to report to PDE.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it contains guidance regarding public discussion of this kind of incident, which is you don't until a decision has been made about public discipline.
Well, you are definitely limited by Act 168 too, regarding those types of confidentiality agreements that used to exist in the past. So if you have someone who has had an incident, you have to report on the Act 168 form. So if a person leaves our employment and goes to a new district, we will get this Act 168 form in the mail, and it asks a series of questions, and it will ask, were they, under investigation for misconduct? And it would be misconduct that's illustrated here. We must say yes or no. There were certain things put into place with the changes in the law to make sure those kind of confidentiality agreements are a thing of the past, so that you have to share.
Oh, okay.
And even if there was a complaint made and it was unfounded, you would still say that the complaint was made.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mary Ann?
No, I have nothing.
Kristen?
I feel comfortable
Good.
given the discussion and what Christine presented.
Yeah, again, you know, when something is specified by state law, we basically have to follow state law.
Exactly.
Thank you. Next is 317.2, terroristic threats and conduct.
I just want to note that the old policy is 318.2, so it's not a mistake if you're looking at.
Oh, got it.
They are both terroristic threats. Just one of those ones that got renumbered with the merger.
With the telescoping of the, yeah, that's a good thing.
So terroristic threats is a very brief policy. I did not recommend any changes, but I did want to ask tonight, is this a policy that we want or need to see included in our policy book? And I ask only because as I surveyed other districts, it is not included. And I don't know if that's because they feel like there are enough policies regarding misconduct, disciplinary procedures, harassment. I don't think there's any harm in having it included, but you know, could it be redundant? Maybe. It's not one that I saw as I surveyed other area districts. It's just skipped.
It did jump out at me when I was looking at the list earlier today that sort of an outlier, like why are we being so specific?
You're going to immediately be calling the authorities, and I don't know that you need the policy. Does it hurt to have it? Probably not.
Well, I know two of our board colleagues who prefer not to have unnecessary policies, so it sounds like you're recommending that we consider not adding it.
You would be in sync with other neighboring districts in Bucks County by not having it.
I'm fine with not including it in that case.
Kristen? Are you okay with not including it?
Yeah.
Good. Penalties for tardiness.
I'm going to ask the same question about penalties for tardiness.
I wondered what prompted this.
Another one that I did not find it in Central Bucks, Centennial, Bensalem, the districts that I looked at. I think this is part of operating procedures. I don't know that you need a specific policy, nor do I think that you have to strengthen or bolster a tardiness discipline with policy. I would suggest
That's sort of a basic of job performance. You got to show up.
I would take it out. It just makes your policy book clunky and.
Are you in agreement, Mary?
I am.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Kristen?
Yeah. Yes, I am as well.
Okay. We'll take a pass on this one as well. I have to remember to make notes that we are taking a pass on terroristic threats and penalties for tardiness. Outside activities is policy 319. That's next.
Okay, so on outside activities, I added some language in red, some guidelines. The guidelines are reproduced from other districts that had the same language. You don't have to include it, but it is helpful, I think, to put the policy into perspective. So the first addition that I made was you won't utilize school material for personal gain, speaking about copyrights to materials, don't use school property to solicit or accept customers for private enterprises, and do not use school time for outside activities when there's no valid reason. Number two is helpful if you have folks who run tutoring businesses or sports clinics. It helps to get rid of the gray and to say that you should not be soliciting customers for those ventures here at work, nor should you be using work time to pursue those endeavors. The guidelines could be more extensive. They can stay that brief in general. The guidelines are not exclusive, so other things could fall under this policy. But those are some typical inclusions that you'll see.
I'm just curious, have staff members been disciplined in the past for these sort of outside activities under the previous policy?
Not here, not during my time here in Council Rock.
Mhm.
I've had experience with this policy outside of Council Rock, relative mostly to tutoring and sports clinics, but not here.
Okay.
I think this one jumped out at me for two reasons. One is sports clinics, which can be costly, but they can also be very valuable and important. And tutoring, I think, is extremely valuable. And I'm very supportive of teachers doing that. The school materials one, that wouldn't apply. Let's say a tutor is tutoring a student in the student's home and they're looking at the textbook the student's been issued. I mean, that's not a problem.
I think this would be a good example under number 1 would be you develop a cyber course and you put hours into the development of it and then you take it and you try to sell it.
That's a good illustration.
You can leave it as it stands without guidelines and allow for interpretation. There's nothing wrong with that decision. If you want to be a little bit more explicit and provide examples, you can include them. But I think either way, you're fine.
And these guidelines are very similar to the previous policy, right?
Marianne, can you repeat what you said? I just missed
I
that.
said guidelines 1, 2, and 3, I think are very consistent with the previous policy.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm fine with them, but obviously I prefer to you all if you have a strong feeling either way.
my strong feeling is just that it's important to have this policy and to have a good one. Because there is activity that, and this also is almost sort of relevant to the conversation that we had previously about school trips.
Mhm.
So no, it looks very consistent with the prior policy.
Looks good to me.
Mrs. McKee pointed out I did not include number 4 from the previous policy. If that's language that you'd like to see included, I do want to pause. I just wasn't sure that I love that language, but we can absolutely put it back.
I'm happy leaving that language out. I think it's kind of vague. What sort of statements would be inconsistent with district policies? That would be hopeful to be the one to decide that. So I'm happy to leave that out.
Anything where you're restricting someone's freedom of speech, I think that you get into a gray area that's.
That's why I
Yes,
said
that it is coming up next. So yeah, I agree that we don't need to add 4 from the old policy into the new one. So we'll recommend the new one as
Yes,
it's proposed.
With Christine's changes.
yes.
Yes, absolutely. 320, freedom of speech in non-school settings.
So I think this policy is very good. It's in tandem with what we're seeing in neighboring districts. I did make one inclusion that violations of the policy may constitute cause for disciplinary action.
And you felt it was important to include that?
This talks about, it's very general, and it says, these are our expectations, please refrain from. By including that, you're placing that warning that, and I think I'll give an example, when I meet with new teachers, I have a segment with them that talks about once you enter this profession, that distinction between private life and professional life is over, that your private life can impact your professional life. So choices that you make, whether it's things you may say or post on social media, can affect your professional life and can get you into trouble. So I think by having it here, you're saying if you really violate this in a way that affects you as an educator, it could result in disciplinary action. It's a hard reality, I think, especially when you first enter the profession, to know that, you know, you absolutely, how you are outside of work can very much jeopardize your employment if you're not careful.
So there are 3 bullet points in the new policy, and there were 5 in the old one. The first one, state clearly that represents personal views. That's sort of, that's almost silly. I mean, I'm glad you didn't, I don't see a need to add it to the new one.
I believe that the PSBA focused a lot on what they included in this particular policy based on several of the lawsuits that occurred over the last 6 to 7 years. They did not want to put the board in a position to lose if they were to try to discipline some employees. And I just want to throw this out there. I think the way that Christine worded this, violations policy may constitute cause is absolutely awesome and much, much better than the way I've seen it worded in the past.
Well, with that explanation, I'm okay with this.
Kristen?
I am as well.
I am too. It looks solid, but not excessive. That's yours. For some reason I didn't have one. All right. 321 is political activities.
Okay, so with 321, I added again some language that would be illustrative. Not at all under any obligation to include it, but the language on the new policy is very brief and didn't really speak to what does this mean. So I put in some examples of what might be in violation or what would be not acceptable. So the 3 bullets there talk about things that we would not want to do.
Yeah, I read this with interest, particularly then the bottom section about the situations that are exempt from the restrictions, such as discussion and study of politics and political issues when applicable to the curriculum. I took that to mean that a math teacher talking about the presidential election might not be, because I have those kinds of complaints, I think, do surface once in a while. So if there's a political discussion, it should be relevant to the curriculum of that class.
And I think this policy is broad enough to where if you had an educator presenting in a way that was very partisan and maybe not productive or engaging to the students, then you could cite this policy and that behavior as a violation. Because you have that first bullet, discussion and study of politics and political issues, when applicable to the curriculum and appropriate to the classroom studies. So if you're teaching math and you're on a tangential lecture, you know, that could be a violation of this policy.
Yeah. On the other hand, it protects a teacher who wants to have a robust debate about the presidential election. If that teacher teaches history or social studies or English or all sorts of.
Or the student asks the teacher, so maybe it's a math teacher and the student asks a question and the teacher answers it in a way that is appropriate to the classroom studies. You know, I don't think this is written in a way that would harm someone who's responding appropriately.
I'm happy to hear that because those teachable moments occur in various
That's
curriculums
a good
and
point.
often initiated by students.
Yeah.
And we don't want to discount their curiosity or their interest. So I'm happy to hear that this gives enough leeway that when it's applicable or appropriate, taking all of that into consideration, teachers shouldn't be afraid to answer a question or address a student's.
Because I think students will engage with teachers
Yeah.
that they connect with. So they might connect with that particular teacher and ask a question. And I think this is worded in such a way that if you're behaving appropriately, this policy is not going to cause you an issue.
Yeah, I think I've never heard of an instance where a teacher did inappropriately engage in political discussion. I think it's usually the complaint is usually unfounded, but those complaints, you do hear those complaints.
And it's a very sensitive time,
Yeah.
typically. One other question about this, how does this mesh with the student groups at the high school? I think there's maybe like a Young Republicans Club or a Young Democrats Club. How does this policy mesh with the functioning of those clubs and their teacher moderators? I realize it's not written with the intention of prohibiting any of that activity, but I'm just wondering how it meshes.
I don't know, an honest answer, because I don't know much about those clubs.
My guess is
I can look into
is
it.
that would be an appropriate educational environment because it is a club, with a, activity. Those are like-minded students, so the teacher is there to once again act as the adult, not as the person collecting the students together. Hey, we've got to form a club. We've got to do this. We've got to go out and march. It's initiated usually by the kids. So I think in that environment, it's okay. I think what's not okay is if the teacher starts putting posters on the wall, please join my party's club, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. You know what I mean? That's where you draw the line. So I mean, there's a whole approval process that clubs go through before they're okay. I mean, the kids come up with an idea, they have to fill out the paperwork, they have to find a sponsor. Once the sponsor's been done, one of my employees was actually the sponsor for the Atheist Club at the high school. So, which I thought, one of my technicians, which I thought was an interesting thing for her to do, but it's completely outside the loop of what she normally would do. But she went through the approval process and it was okay for her to.
It's pretty neat. And that
I think
was
they changed it to free thinkers.
three things. And that was a club formed at
Pretty sure that's what they changed it to.
that was a club formed at the initiative of the students.
Yes,
Interesting.
that's no stuff.
So
That helps them.
the third addition there, the use of students for writing, addressing, distributing partisan political materials is forbidden. Should it happen within the context of those groups and as directed and initiated by students, wouldn't be prohibited by this policy?
No, because this is concerning employees. Employees should not engage.
You're right.
This is students.
Okay. Thank you.
We could too run it by the high school and just say, is this going to curtail you in any way?
If you don't mind,
I don't,
it'd be easy to run by the two principals, one at each high school.
because I don't know enough about it to feel comfortable to say that it's not going to be prohibitive.
Well, and to Mary Ann's point, I wouldn't want to put forward a policy that inadvertently offends or alarms teachers. I mean,
I agree.
why cause it? So yeah, thank you for doing that.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So-
Kristen? Did you hear what Christine's gonna do?
Jeff, take us off mute.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Yes, I've been following the conversation and I'm very comfortable with that.
Good. All right, we'll move to the next.
So.
I mean, we're going to recommend this
Unless she gets.
unless she surfaces some concern
And
from the high schools.
I'll circle back and just say
Yeah.
what I've learned.
Thank you.
Thank you. But otherwise, we'll recommend to our full board for approval. 322.
322 is perfect just the way it is. It says just enough, and I think it's perfect.
Mhm.
I like the inclusion about the superintendent may approve acts of generosity in unusual situations, because our district does really pull together when people have tragedies.
Someone's in need.
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Good. All right. So it's minimal, but it's good.
I think it's
Covers it.
perfect.
Right.
So for tobacco, I have added the phenomenon that is e-cigarettes and vapors to the
Yeah.
policy, just so that we cover that as well, because I don't think we're any longer talking about just tobacco. So I have, for the purpose of the policy, tobacco use shall be defined as a lighted or unlighted cigarette, cigar, pipe, or other smoking product or material, smokeless tobacco, including all e-cigarettes, all nicotine delivery systems, and vapor devices.
Well, not going to be popular here, but I have a question. Because as I read through this, I did reference the state law, number 1, that's in blue up. I did go back and read that to see what all is encompassed here. And the part about the board prohibits tobacco use by district employees at school-sponsored activities that are held off school property. And when tobacco use could be an unlighted cigarette and you're at, Goodnoe night at the Trenton Thunder game and an employee wants to go have a cigarette somewhere. I don't know, it just seems
I agree with you.
more than we need.
It's a bit over the top.
And as
If it's not, like, it reminds me of like Catholic school.
Well,
It was in your purse if you were guilty.
so
I would be-
that kind of jumped out at me as being maybe more than we need to do in terms of monitoring our employees' use of
If it's
tobacco.
off school property and it's not in a school vehicle, then what right do we really?
It's a school-sponsored activity. It's not just to play devil's advocate here. If it's a school-sponsored activity, you don't want the teacher to have the reputation. I guess, I'm not sure, I don't work this one. I'm just,
And in reading what's cited there, number 1, it's, I guess it's the state legislature. In reading through that, the language around that said that a district may. It doesn't say that a school district must prohibit that activity at a school event off school property. So
so it's up to you guys.
exactly. And personally, I just found that to be a little over-intrusive. I understand the rationale behind it, but I don't know that we want to monitor our employees to that
Say
extent.
Are discouraged and leave it at that,
Mhm.
because then
The board discourages tobacco use.
For example, there's a high school trip somewhere. They're in Europe.
Yeah, I was thinking
And
the exact same
midnight,
thing.
right? They want to go out.
Yeah, I do. I just find it
And
a little
somebody
more
who's got a
intrusive.
grudge against the teacher says, "Did you know what they?"
Yeah.
All right, so if you change prohibits to discourages, what do you think of that, Matt?
The board discourages tobacco use by district employees at school-sponsored activities of all tobacco. How's that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Changes been made.
Kristen?
I'm fine with that.
And I would say, here it would say possession of a takeout, lighted or unlighted.
Yeah.
Are you gonna keep changing?
Well, again, I
What
agree.
if somebody,
Someone has
they
a
got
pack of
a pack in
cigarettes.
their purse, like what they're.
Mhm. Technically, that's what
Yeah,
it says.
possession, yeah. What?
Technically, that's what it says.
So if somebody, if a district employee inadvertently came to work with cigarettes in their bag,
It would be in violation of
Of
this
this policy.
policy.
no, that's not reasonable.
No, and it's
Where-
not,
where's
it's not followed.
It's up to.
Under definition, paragraph 2, for the purposes of this policy, tobacco use shall be defined as
And then I would
use and/or possession of a lighted or unlighted.
I would just put it in shall be defined as use of
Mhm. Yeah.
cigarette, pipe, cigar.
Because that's really what we're talking
Yeah.
about, right?
Right, exactly, like, But if you're carrying your jewel around with you, I think you should probably not be in trouble.
Or if you have a pack of cigarettes in your backpack.
Yeah, it's your choice, as long as you're not.
Is that okay? How do you say?
I would just say shall be defined as,
Use
of.
Yeah, you don't need lighted or unlighted.
yeah, you got it.
You think that's reasonable, Kristen?
I do. I mean, I do have concerns about an employee that, you know, is participating in an event and using tobacco openly, but I think you need to leave some room so that it's not a policy that's so restrictive. So I think what you guys are doing sounds great.
And the other thing we did was we got rid of the possession clause.
Yeah.
And to your point, Kristen, I think by using that word, the board discourages tobacco use, and, you know, school-sponsored activities. I think that makes clear, we don't want to see you doing that around children. It's discouraged.
Exactly, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So I agree with you. I think that's a good way forward.
Good. 324, personnel files.
So under personnel files, I made a few very minor additions, and the additions are relative to who and when can review their personnel file. So, and this is in our CBAs as well. So it's really just lining up the policy with our collective bargaining agreements, which is you can see your file, but in the presence of another designee, and that you should not alter or remove anything in your file. And then I also called out who would be permitted to look at their file. I can give you a real life example. We had someone call, I think it was a year ago, who had worked here 20 years ago that wanted to come see their file.
No.
So it's helpful to have in policy who this pertains to, because there are files that perhaps we no longer maintain. And go ahead.
Should this be personnel who wish to review their own records?
Personnel entitled to review their own.
You have with own records. Should I do
Personnel who wish to review their, yes, sorry. And then under appeal, there was a sentence that just said personnel who would like to appeal something they found in their file can do so in writing. So I made that a little bit more descriptive and put some language in to say they can make a written request. The person can take a look at that and make a determination, but it could also go higher up to the superintendent. And that some language saying your personnel file is only shared by only shared with appropriate leadership, attorneys, or auditors. So a lot of sensitivity around personnel files with staff. We often will say to staff, like, it's okay. No one is going to look through your file unless they have authorization to do that.
And oftentimes something may be placed in a personnel file with a terminus date on it. This will be removed after X number of months, days, years.
And we do, as a course of practice, tell employees when there is something negative in the file that they can write a statement to go along with it. Put the incident into context or explain remorse. And that normally employees will do that.
Kristen?
It sounds good to me. This is an area that I know a lot about, and so I trust Mr. Taylor's thoughts on this and you all.
Yeah, and it's, as with most of these, very specifically dictated by state law and past policy. Okay, if we're good with that, we'll move on to dress and grooming.
Dress and grooming is a policy that I've needed more often than I would like to admit. I think this dress and grooming policy is very helpful. when we have issues with those who are not coming in clean and neat and well groomed. So this policy, I think, is a little bit more explanatory than the one that preceded it. It also gives employees the opportunity to speak up if they, have a concern, and I think it's great.
I, of course, have a question about the line about hairstyles that may cause a safety or health hazard.
In the shop, I
So,
want the shop teacher to have really long hair,
mhm.
because it could give me stuff.
Yeah, I think we could take that out and be absolutely fine. What I like about the policy is physically clean, neat, well-groomed, and dressed in a manner consistent with job responsibilities. So if you're a groundskeeper, you should be able to wear your work boots and a t-shirt. If you're a teacher, then you want to come in knowing that you're working with kids and have on appropriate clothing. The neat, groomed, and clean are where we've needed to talk with people, not so much about long hair
Is that
or.
going to remove it?
What does everyone, that just kind of jumped out at me. What do we,
Seems
It's not
archaic.
been an
Seems
issue
archaic.
for me ever, so.
Was that? No, that's not, it will never be, will it?
I would say,
No, it seems archaic. See, it's almost,
yeah, I think too that that it could be perceived as you don't like my dreadlocks or you don't like my,
that's exactly what jumped to mind
Okay.
when you raised it.
we do not need it.
Or, big hair or anything.
Mhm.
And it's covered with, consistent with your job
Your job.
responsibility. So if you have somebody whose hair's, maybe a concern because of the work they're doing, you could still use this policy to support it without that there. I think.
I'm good with the rest of it.
All right. 326 complaint process.
I would recommend removing the complaint process. It is not a present policy in Central Bucks, New Hope, Centennial, or Ben Salem. And I think that's because there are other policies that walk you through how to file a complaint, how to address issues that you may be having. You can leave this here. I'm just not sure that it's needed.
So, what covers that area if you don't have this policy?
So if you look at harassment would absolutely cover if you feel that someone is mistreating you or violating state laws or regulations or policies or rules of the board. You could use that policy to place a complaint. I just don't know that you need it. You can keep it. And it creates another avenue by which employees can express that they're having issues. I have really not ever seen anybody come and say, I'm citing this particular policy. It usually falls under the harassment policy. There's nothing here that would be harmful if we kept it. It's all good practice. You'll meet together in a private informal conference. If the decision made is not satisfactory, there's recourse to a higher level.
We could,
I just worry, like, what's going to come out of this policy? I don't like the way he looked at me today, or,
Yeah.
The harassment is going to cover things that are unacceptable in the workplace. I don't know. You
so
can
how many,
leave it.
okay, so no, all of our teachers are covered by the agreement with the CREA.
Mhm.
Most of our staff is covered by the agreement with CRESPA.
Have all of your support staff fall under CRESPA. Your professionals are under CREA. administrators, with the exception of a few, are under the Act 93.
Yeah.
And then you have your very small group of confidential employees.
So the vast majority of our employees are covered in one way or another
There's a process in
by a
place.
process for handling complaints. So this is redundant.
I
So then-
think so.
So you don't really need it then? It's kind of like a blanket policy essentially.
It could serve to create more confusion too.
Yeah. Okay, then, Kristen?
I'm fine, yeah, I'm fine with that. I just
Alright.
wanted to know the explanation, that's
Right.
all.
I'm fine removing that.
All right, so what I'll do is, when we move forward on these other 300s, I'll convey to the board that our recommendation is not to do 326, not to maintain 326 or 317
Drop to.
or add 318.
We'll just move to retire these policies.
Well, yeah, we didn't have 318 though, did we? The tardiness one,
I believe we did.
did we?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we're retiring those 3. That's our recommendation, okay. Good, then we're moving on to 328. Compensation plan, salary schedules.
I think this looks great. Speaks to the board's right to approve individual contracts, salary schedules, talks about the Act 93 group having to meet and discuss. This also talks about the ability for the board to look at new hires and give salary adjustments when appropriate. The delegation of authority is perfect. Your contracts, your collective bargaining agreements, board resolutions. I think it's perfect the way it is. That last sentence is helpful, especially now as we enter into yet another year of great shortages. Having the ability for the superintendent to say, I do want to start this person at a higher salary step is great. And it also makes very clear that compensation is approved by the board. So we have to negotiate that, of course, or else we're committing an unfair labor practice, but no compensation agreement can be reached without the authorization of the school board.
It looks good to me.
Me too.
Good, we'll recommend adopting this as revised. We have covered the entire list of policies for tonight on the agenda, and we'll move to public comment. And since there's no public, we'll move to board comment. Kristen.
I don't know if I have too much to say other than that it was helpful to talk through a number of the policies, and I very much appreciate that and going through my questions. But no, I don't think I have any additional comments right now.
Thank you for participating.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I hope you all have a great evening.
You too. Well, we're not adjourned yet.
Nothing.
No, Mary Ann doesn't have comment. I don't have comment. Any further comment from staff? We're adjourned. Thank you, Kristen.